Welcome to Health is Wealth. I'm Station Manager Tina Cortez, and my co-host is Dr. Mike Carrozza. Good morning, Dr. Mike.
Good morning, Tina.
And our focus today is that silent killer, stress. Now, who doesn't suffer from that?
Yeah, all of us, of course. Our last segment, we talked about heart health. Obviously, that was our February segment, and the whole entire February segments were dedicated to education and heart health. I just think it's interesting that we come into this segment and just talk about stress, which is a major factor and can contribute to a lot of heart issues as well. But for the most part, stress is a culprit for a lot of things. When you're sluggish and you're stressed, there's one thing that could be the major culprit, and that's your thyroid, because there is this connection. We're going to talk about the connection between your thyroid gland and your adrenal gland. Okay, so let's just get right into this really quickly, Tina, because I know you're going to ask me. You're going to say, what's an adrenal gland? Mm-hmm. You know about the thyroid, yes, which is that butterflied sort of organ that's in the midsection of your neck. The adrenal glands just sit on top of your kidneys. And they're triangular shaped organs, and they pump out things like cortisol, and that's the stress hormone, and of course adrenaline as well. And this is the fight or flight, right? This is that idea of the fight or flight. We're going to talk about the sympathetic nervous system and how this actually gets interacted a little later. But the thyroid gland just basically pumps out thyroid hormone. So this is mainly T3, T4, and this is that organ that you look at when a patient comes in and they start talking about fatigue, right? So when somebody comes into the practice and they say, look, I'm fatigued, there's really just a few things that it could be. But those few things can actually be astronomical in terms of their health, because it could be detrimental, in fact. And so if there's the stress, and you look at the things like their cortisol, then it's more of a fatigue. If you look at their thyroid, it's also a fatigue, and then maybe their iron or their B12 levels are low and suboptimal as well. So you want to look at all those factors. But the big culprits, or the causes, if you will, of stress can lead to heart disease, blood pressure, your emotional state as well. And then just this cortisol not being balanced alone will actually lead to things like weight gain, which is a big issue.
Now, what about those folks who say that stress is a good thing, that they actually perform better when they're stressed?
You know what? And I love that, because I'm one of those individuals. So and that's okay, because this is more like the athletic individuals. This is more like performance-driven stress, performance-driven anxiety, if you will. Now, these are just individuals, and I remember when I was in university, I was in medical school, so this allowed us to strive to do well, right? Because it's like that stress, it's like that fire in where, and then just stimulates your body just to say, hey, let's go, or else what's going to happen. And that's a different form. Now, stress can be a good thing, of course, but then for too long and prolonged stress, that's where the problems start. So these are short-term anxiety sort of driven stress successes. For athletes, it's that, they're not playing hockey and trying to score that puck every single second of the day, right? So it's that prolonged stressful situation. I think that's where the problems start. And, there's ways to de-stress, right? There's mindful meditation, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's, just simple meditation, and even things like Reiki that we spoke about in the past. But in terms of the excitatory state, aka this sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system, I just want to get into this really quickly. So the sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight, right? It's that, back in the day, the hunter and the gatherer days, okay? So it's like you either, if you have a saber-toothed tiger chasing you, you'd either just fight or you just run and take off.
You take off.
And then the parasympathetic is this rest and digest, right? So this is the restful, digestible. So the digestion will actually help. So like when you're stressed, you actually don't digest. So the stressed people in the world are the constipated people that come into my practice, to be honest with you, because they're the ones that don't have time to sit on the toilet in the morning and relax and maybe read the paper, or just try to it's that rest and digest and just have a good bowel movement, because it's important to go to the bathroom, and we'll talk about digestion a little later. But it's a big problem right now, and stress can actually take over somebody, and then that's why we have things like heart disease and whatnot. But for the most part, it's this cortisol which is the culprit. And you want to try to balance this out.
Okay, well, let's take our first break. And functional nutritionist Jen Pike is back with the ways to manage stress. You're listening to Health is Wealth on 105.9 The Region. Welcome back to Health is Wealth with Dr. Mike.
Tina, I'd like to welcome Jen Pike back on the show. She's a functional nutritionist, and she's going to actually help us with this connection of cortisol, stress, thyroid, this HPA axis. Don't worry, Tina, if you're confused. I promise by the end of this show, you're going to be very, very impressed in terms of what we're going to come out with. So, Jen, of course, we know we had you on our last show. It was amazing. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming back. So, you have an expertise in this area because this is something that you obviously you work closely with a lot of females, and International Women's Day, I believe, is tomorrow.
It is.
And so as a tribute to that, we want to talk about women's health. And we want to talk about a lot of the things that women sort of, problems women have. Yeah. We spoke a little bit about the hormone in terms of estrogen, progesterone, and the menopause connection in our last segment. This segment, I want to focus on a very important hormone that a lot of people don't think is that important, and it's cortisol. So maybe you can help us talk about the connection.
Well, you had mentioned the HPA axis, which I think that's probably the best place to start so that people really understand what we're talking about.
So what is it? What is it, Jen? What's the HPA?
The HPA is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So in English, what that means is this is in your brain. So where we actually recognize stress, where we perceive it, is in the brain. And that is what is creating that initial signal to the adrenals that is then also communicating with the thyroid and in women, ovaries as well too. So there's a few different axes. So it's important to understand that with stress, it can be real stress that is truly happening. It can be imagined stress where you have got yourself worked up into a state. It could be anticipated stress where, again, nothing has really happened yet, but you're worrying about the worst case scenario. You could be watching a scary show. Your body has no idea. You are witness to something that's not real. It believes if your heart rate is up, if your breath has changed, if your pupils are dilated and you're sweating, you are the one that's under the yeah, exactly. And so the problem with that is your body will create the same cascading stress hormone reaction. Cortisol will increase. You're going to pump out norepinephrine and epinephrine, so your adrenaline increases. This is a really healthy, positive response if you are in a true state of stress. But when the everyday stress is what's creating this reaction, your job, relationships, your finances, your health, those types of things, you are wearing and tearing on a system that is not meant to be turned on 24/7.
And that sounds like it would be very typical of every woman I know.
Yeah, every human, I think, as well, too. For us as women, I think our burden of it is stronger because for most of us, and not every household, but for most, the women are taking care of everyone and everything. Like I say, I have an amazing husband, but he's not the one booking the appointments for the kids, making sure everybody is, on time, doing all of the minutia of the house that really is what adds up to our stress as women. So the impact of this is that we throw around terms like adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. Really what it is your brain is fatigued and exhausted. And that communication system up top is then telling your adrenals how much of these hormones to produce. The adrenals themselves, it's very rare, less than 1%, which are autoimmune conditions where you're either literally not producing any cortisol any longer or there's too much. But in most cases, it's the brain. It's happening up top. So getting our stress under control is huge. And where it connects to the thyroid is that in almost every case of thyroid disease, whether it is underactive, overactive, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, if you start to pull this individual's health history back, they have been suffering from adrenal stress for at least 10 years or longer. And the signs and symptoms were there, but they weren't being tested appropriately. They weren't being asked the right questions.
And so the last resort is they'll go get a blood test during their annual physical, and then they'll see their TSH levels just jump, and all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, and they're like, "Oh, what happened?"
And the problem with that too, even how that's written on standard lab testing, TSH is not a thyroid hormone; it's a pituitary hormone.
Exactly.
So on your blood work, it'll show up as a thyroid hormone, and it's typically the only one they will test, and that is 1/6 of the test that we should be running for true thyroid picture. TSH is being secreted by your pituitary in your brain. It is then knocking on the thyroid's door and saying, okay, here is an appropriate signaling hormone amount. Now you need to produce your hormones T4 and T3. The thyroid responds and does that. Now, our body has an active and an inactive form of this hormone. So T4, which is primarily what we pump out, about 80% of that is coming from the thyroid. It's inactive, which means it's great that we're producing it, but we can't absorb it. We can only absorb T3. Your body has to shuttle this to your liver, And your liver, kidneys, and your gut are who are now responsible for converting this so your cells can uptake this. If this isn't happening and no one's testing this, you can have healthy TSH levels, but your hair's falling out, you don't poop, you're exhausted, you can't lose weight, you're cold all the time, you have every sign and symptom, but you're fine because your TSH is totally fine. But they're not measuring your thyroid hormones. And then we could take it a step further and we could measure reverse T3, which if that's elevated, there's inflammation happening. And then we could measure thyroid antibodies, which is how you actually are able to understand, is this an autoimmune thyroid condition or is this not? And there's a big difference in how you would teach someone to care for themselves in those different scenarios.
Is this a blood test that you can take?
So yes, this is actually a blood test. We do it in the office, and quite often, obviously, in terms of my practice, we take it to the next step. So we're always testing reverse T3, free T3, T4, and we're doing TSH, and we're doing anti-TPO and anti-TG. So these are anti-thyroid globulins because we want to find out what's going on. But unfortunately, the current medical model that we have right now it doesn't allow for practitioners to just go, and test this. All in all. So it's the infrastructure. It's nobody's fault. It's just the infrastructure in terms of what they're allowed, in terms of what the government is controlling. So we can test this. There's a fee for this, but it's way worth it to check it.
Oh yeah.
Reverse T3 is probably the most expensive test. It's like a $78 test, just one analysis, but it's huge if you're trying to find a picture. I want to make this point, and I love how Jen brought this up. The gut plays a tremendous role in this whole thing. So I'll have a patient come into my office, and before they start off on a weight loss program, we're going to look at their TSH, and we're going to make sure that everything is in check. And the standard markers for TSH, the levels that are acceptance in terms of Canadian acceptance, and then there's the international standards. So they'll come back and they'll say, maybe they'll have a TSH of 4.5. Which, as you know, Jen, is sluggish because, the international standards are just above, anything above 2 is, if not, in terms of my practice, is not optimal. And you have to start looking at the cortisol connection, this HPA axis, and you need to start looking at the other free hormones. So you want to look at this and change it up and make sure it's in the zone. But I want to make a point, and I think when patients do lose some weight. And it's interesting because a lot of practitioners say, they need to jump on a medication, like a Synthroid right away, just because of elevated TSH. I think it's wrong. And Jen, we can ask your opinion on this as well, because when you're not changing the diet and you're not doing things that you should by controlling the HPA axis, the cortisol, all these dietary things that are very necessary to allow this symphony to take place, things aren't going to work. So instead of just taking that one pill to just lower your number TSH just so that you look okay is really not the right course of action. And I think the best example is that I've seen patients with elevated TSH up to like 6 or 7. You put them on a diet program, you clean their gut, all of a sudden their TSH drops to like 3. Why is that possible? Did they need hormone medication? Did they need this thyroid or Synthroid or medication to allow for this? Now, in some instances, it's very necessary for sure. But the point I'm trying to make is that, if weight gain and weight loss, and we have to address, and these are your concerns, we have to address, is this an autoimmune disease or is it just a signaling miscommunication?
And
right?
this is the big issue, is that is what it comes down to with thyroid. Or is this a signaling problem we have from the brain to the gland, or is this a glandular problem that we actually have that's connected to the gut? And that's what's so important for people to get. When you get put on something like Synthroid, it's pure T4. Well, what is the inactive thyroid hormone? T4. If your issue is conversion, you're not converting. That T4, it's a placebo Band-Aid effect for your body. Now, for some people, there are some people who they need to be on that medication. Thyroid cancer is on the rise. It is one of the fastest rising cancers in women right now. 1 in 9 are being diagnosed, almost all ending in either radioactive treatment of their thyroid or having it completely removed, a thyroidectomy. You need to be on medication for the rest of your life. You can't live without your thyroid. But there are options. Your lifestyle is huge, and then there's naturally desiccated thyroid, which I know you utilize in your practice.
Which I prescribe, quite a bit.
That's important because NDT is T4, T3, 2T, T1. It's all the cofactors, so it's a holistic approach to supporting this gland.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because some patients who do not, and I see this in practice, that they actually, and it's quite common, they actually don't respond well to the synthetic thyroid.
Yeah.
So they don't respond well to it because of what you just mentioned, that it's inactive and it's a T4. Whereas when you give somebody the cofactors, is more T3, the T3, T4, which is desiccated thyroid. Now it's isolated, of course, from the animal. So it's an animal isolation, and it's desiccated thyroid. So it's the actual desiccated gland, the thyroid, with the active constituents. But patients respond better to this.
Yeah. And the problem that I see, literally, I would say probably 8 out of 10 women in my practice of thyroid disease, is when they've been put on Synthroid alone, they still have heart palpitations. They're still exhausted. Their symptoms have not really improved all that much. And the only thing that's being measured when they go back to their endocrinologist or their GP is that TSH level without digging deeper. And the secondary prescription after that Synthroid, when they're not feeling better, is an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, which actually those selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors suppress the gut function even more. So now we're just compounding instead of slowing things down, taking the time to educate this woman, to teach her what it really means to take care of this HPA axis, her gut function, what her endocrine system really needs and support. That is really, that is my hope. That is my wish for every woman, is that she can have the accessibility to a conversation like this, so she has a better understanding of what to ask for.
But if we're just going to our GP, they're not going to invest that kind of time to really dig down deep and discover what the issue is.
And it's not that they don't want to, I will tell you that. I have a lot of medical doctors that are colleagues and friends and some family members. They are now given through OHIP, the standard time they get per patient is 7 minutes. And if you've noticed in the average medical office now, there are posters and signs that say you get to ask one question. You get to come in with one issue. If you have multiple issues, you have to book multiple appointments. So they're squeezed as well. And the other thing as well too is they're general practitioners. They're not necessarily specialists in these areas. And I think we are part of that issue too. We have to take the pressure off the doctor knowing everything, because our health is changing at such a rapid rate due to our environment and issues now. It is, as a functional practitioner, I am never not in school. Every client I work with is putting me back in school. Every situation I'm working with is putting me back in school. And I don't think a lot of Western medicine-based practitioners have the time or ability to be able to do that.
But then don't you think that patients or clients have to be advocates for themselves?
100%. You have to be the CEO of your health. And the problem is that we, especially in Canada, I work with women in over 13 countries in our program. Canada is the hardest to get people to pay out of pocket for their health, because we have been conditioned that it's covered by the government. And if it's not on the OHIP, well, then I'm not going to spend that. And my thing, and I say this with all due respect, because we all have those areas of our life where we prioritize. But if you're swiping through media on a $1,500 phone every day and you're telling me you don't have the ability to invest in your health, you're not that serious about it. We have to start to look at where we are allocating our funds. One of the things I do with women in my practice is it's not go and get a second job to pay for this. Let's talk about where we're actually leaking finances on a daily basis. One of the simplest things I have found is call up every single insurance provider, cell phone, cable, all of that. I guarantee you we can find a couple $100 extra in what you're leaking monthly, and we can now reallocate that and invest it into your health.
And it's worth it.
There's that blood work.
Yeah.
Right? So we're looking at years of suffering and discomfort in our bodies. One test, one panel, one conversation with a practitioner who is looking at all of you, your whole life, symptoms, everything, can change your life.
Wonderful. I mean, I just want to talk a little bit about the infrastructure. I think you mentioned something, and I just, for our listeners out there, the system is a little bit broken, unfortunately. And so, in terms of the practitioners, they're pretty much getting it, but they understand it. But there's only so much time that they have, so it's not their fault.
No,
it's not the GP's fault. So what happens is, when it comes time to these hormonal issues, whether it's a hormonal issue, whether it's a cardio issue, whether it's a diabetes issue, they get punched through the system to specialists because they don't have the time. So hence that lack of time. Now, I do have some colleagues that are medical doctors as well, and they spend quite a bit of time, and they don't spend that 7 minutes. And it's unfortunate because they're not getting paid any longer to spend that time. And these are the people that are just going over and above the call. And most practitioners, most GPs out there actually do this. And the biggest problem, I think, is that it's the system. The system just doesn't allow them to test for it. So they can't go out and test an anti-TPO because it's not in their scope. And if they do it, they're going to get flagged.
Exactly. They get their hand slapped.
They're going to get flagged, and they're going to get some issues. And so it doesn't warrant it for them to do so. So it's not their fault. I mean, at that same notion is that if you have a thyroid condition during your your annual physical, which you're going to go see your doctor for, and if your thyroid gets flagged, they're going to say, okay, go see this endocrinologist, and he'll help you. He or she will help you. That's the system, and then now you have a 6-month waiting list before getting to that specialist. That's where the system I feel is broken. In terms of adding to that and sort of not having that system, that's where practitioners like myself and Jen can actually help with these patients to actually help with the burden on the medical system. And I think this is a key discussion because the medical system is overburdened with such easy cases, and this is this gray area. It's not so black and white. It's like, listen, I'm not well, but I'm not dying. What's going on? Well, like, this is your wellness now.
Yes.
And so this is what Jen is saying, is that you can spend a few extra $100 on your health to sort of optimize it so that you can get better and feel good. And believe it or not, these are 80% of our people right now.
Yeah.
This is 80% of the population.
Yeah, that's sitting in the waiting room, waiting for this. And the reality is they're still not going to find the solutions once they get on the other side of the door. So we've been conditioned that you go to the doctor, and there's lots of cases where how grateful are we that we live in a country where we have the accessibility that we do, but that is not where you're going to find, like you said, your wellness. Your health does not live on the other side of that door.
We have a medical system in terms of the emergency room. How many emergency room visits are necessary? I mean, if we look at the stats on this, it's crazy because there are people that are going to emergency rooms for like constipation.
Yes.
You're constipated. Let's go to emergency room. There's people dying. There's people that need care. Like, we have to really think about how we can help on this infrastructure and sort of, and I think we're doing a good job, Jen. I really do. I think we're patients are getting awareness. They're understanding, say, look, you know what? This is not a medical emergency. I think I just need to lose some weight and feel good. And this is part of the awareness of what we're doing with this show, is just to give people education. So I think the system is broken, and we're here to help. And we're here to help a lot of people, and that's part of what this show is all about. So, I mean, you're stressed, your thyroid is underactive, you're stressed out, your cortisol is sort of skyrocketing, you're not sleeping, right? Because this is a common condition that you see, right, Jen? I mean, what are some of the options for some of these patients? Like, we talked about, so first of all, we want to talk about some testing, right? So I know you like the Dutch test, which is a urine test, which tells you all the different, I love the Dutch test as well. So what do you like in particular about that test? Like, how does it help?
From an adrenal perspective, I love that it's showing the 24-hour diurnal pattern. So I can see exactly what's happening with your cortisol, the metabolized cortisol, your cortisol production, and then what's freely moving throughout your body. It'll also show me cortisone, which is the inactive form of cortisol. I love that it shows me all the hormone profiling, the metabolites, and are you methylating? So detoxification has 3 different processes in our body, from how we first break it down to then how do we neutralize it to how are you shipping it out. Also the organic acids and the neurotransmitters. So when there's thyroid issues, depression is a common one with that because you're low in a lot of these neurotransmitters that are produced in the lining of the gut. Comes back to the gut again. It's a lot of what we're feeling in between our ears up top is connected to what is going on in that gut and that digestive system.
And that's that neuroinflammation. That's that leaky brain connection. We did it in a previous episode. I mean, and that's exactly what
we talk about that a great deal on this show for sure. Now, just before we wrap things up, we only have a couple minutes left, but I'd like to talk about, are there options in terms of exercise, yoga, diet to help with stress?
100%.
Okay, so what are our options?
So you just mentioned a couple of them. Like yoga is super important. Walking, I love. Pilates, I love. We talked a lot about this in the last segment. What I don't love for the individual who's super stressed is going to be high intensity interval training, the boot camps, things like I work and teach in a CrossFit and spin space, and I love those things, but it's not for the average person, especially the one who's suffering from tremendous amounts of stress.
And adrenal fatigue.
Right? It is, you're just going to bombard your system in that way,
and
you'll gain more weight.
Yeah, and I see it all the time. I see a lot of patients come in and their adrenals are taxed. They're actually in adrenal fatigue. By the way, these are urine tests that we mentioned, which you mentioned about the Dutch test. Simple urine test.
You take it at home.
You don't even have to provide a blood sample.
Yeah.
We're talking urine test. Like some people have an issue with spitting because the saliva test, as you know, I test a lot of saliva as well. There's an issue with that, but everybody's got to pee, right? So it's an easy test, just a backflip. But when a patient comes in and they're adrenally fatigued, they're like taxed through the stress, and we know that their biomarkers are just flatlined. And I see these patients come into my office. They're like, look, I'm just hitting boot camp 5-6 days a week, and I'm just going to the boot camp. That's the only thing that makes me feel better. But I mean, your adrenals are taxed.
But they feel better because that short-term intensity increases their adrenaline, and adrenaline, it's like your dopamine hit. It's their drug. So they live for that period of time where it's the only thing they feel like they're actually doing well. And then there's the food side of it. Right? So the nutrition side is massive. And that is one of the ways you're going to decrease the stress on your body is decrease the nutritional stress that you're contributing. Get rid of the fast food, the processed, eat organic more often. I mean, we're sipping some incredible organic green juice from Nature's Emporium right now, where, I've been shopping for 23 years. How fortunate are we to have
such a great place?
Oh my gosh.
Like everything you get there is organic from anything.
And I got to say, Jennifer looks 23 for goodness sake. Yeah. So, wow.
So
it's working.
So we have the support systems in place in terms of the proper channels to shop. So the grocery, we're there. At Nature's Emporium, you can go. You can trust it. All organic vegetables. Let's talk about the grains because I just really quickly talk about nutrition because a stressed individual, a female for sure, who's stressed out, adrenally fatigued. She's craving two things: salt
and sugar,
and chips, and sugar. And then grains, like simple grains, because they want to get that quick fix. Can you make some?
It's because her serotonin has plummeted as well, and so she's looking for the carbohydrates to pick her back up, and it's a short-term fix. And listen, we need carbohydrates for healthy functioning, but what we don't need them in the form of is glutinous breads and pastas and donuts and cakes and cookies and crackers and chocolate bars. And then the salt, when you're craving salt, that's a big sign of adrenal dysfunction.
Sure.
That sodium potassium pump is incredibly important, and there's certain nutrients like magnesium, B vitamins, zinc, all of that as well too.
And then of course taking things like your omegas and really important. Listen, Jen, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate this. We had like a double segment with you. We're really privileged. Thank you very much. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about the hormone project that you have going on?
Yeah, we had chatted about it in the last one. Actually, since we're talking about Nature's, I'd love to talk about the Simplicity Project Live that I teach. And that I teach at the Nature's Emporium Newmarket location. And it's a 6-week program that is really for the individual who's thought about going back to school because they want to learn about this, but they're interested for their own body and for their family. And so each week we have a different topic, taking you everything from digestive health, anti-inflammatory properties, your hormones, budgeting, shopping. You get a loot bag every single week from Nature's Emporium. You get discounts on your groceries for the entire 6 weeks. And it is just, again, like I've shared before, my whole platform is creating these different educational streams for people.
When does it start? And
April 29th is the next launch date. Our early bird pricing for a discounted rate opens up on March 4th.
And where can they find this information?
The best place is for them to actually visit www.naturesemporium.com directly onto their website.
Wonderful.
That's terrific. Yeah. Thanks for joining us again, Jen.
Thank you.
And Dr. Mike, let's remind our listeners how to connect with you and your team at AppleMed.
So applemedclinic.ca is our website. We're at 3560 Rutherford Road here in Vaughan, right at Rutherford and Weston Road. You can reach us at 905-417-4000, or you can check us out on Instagram at AppleMed Clinic.
That's our show for this week. If you missed any part of Health is Wealth, go to our website, 1059theregion.com. Thanks for listening.